I'm writing this with a 300-year-old gold coin burning a hole through my palm. It's pulsing, like a heartbeat, getting faster every hour. 3 days ago, I kicked the woman my best friend loved in the face and left them both to be digested alive by something that's been feeding in the darkness since before human civilization existed. The coin won't leave me. I've thrown it in lakes, buried it in concrete, locked it in bank vaults. Every morning I wake up with it clenched in my fist, my sheets soaked with a fluid that smells like the inside of a stomach, and I can hear them screaming my name from hundreds of miles away. Mark's voice is getting younger, like whatever's dissolving him is working backward through time. Sarah stopped screaming 2 days ago. Now she just whispers the same 2 words, over and over. Come back. The cave gave me a choice. Save my friends, or save myself. I chose wrong. And the worst part? I'd do it again. Every single time. Because when you're face to face with something that's been alive for millions of years, something that breathes and hungers and remembers, survival instinct doesn't care about friendship or love or basic human decency. Last night I caught myself entering GPS coordinates to Jack's Falls while I was asleep. The coin is hot enough now to blister skin, and this morning, when I looked in the mirror, I saw tissue moving under my cheek. Just for a second. Like something was growing inside me. I think I brought part of the cave back with me. I think it's going to make me return, and I think when I do, I'm going to find out that some fates are worse than death, and last for centuries. This is how I doomed my best friends. This is how I learned that some caves don't just contain the dead, they digest them. Slowly. Forever. Jack's Falls isn't the kind of town that gets written about in travel magazines. Population hovering around 3,000. One main street with a hardware store that's been closing earlier each year, and a diner that gave up on dinner service back in 2019. The coastline is so rocky and unwelcoming that even the seagulls seem resentful about it, their cries sharp and accusatory as they wheel over black stones that jut from the surf like broken teeth. The town's only claim to fame is its name, which comes from Captain Jack Morgan, no relation to the rum, though the locals will make that joke if you give them half a chance. Morgan was a pirate who supposedly fled British naval ships in 1699 and vanished somewhere along our stretch of coast. Local legend says he and his crew made it to shore with their plunder, but were never seen again. Most people assume they got away in a rowboat or died in the surf trying to escape. Some of the older folks claim the whole thing's made up, just a story someone invented to sell nautical-themed souvenirs to the 12 tourists who show up each summer. I assumed it was bullshit too, until 3 months ago. Until I watched my best friend get dragged into Living Rock while he screamed my name. Until I kicked the woman he loved in the face to save my own worthless life. Until I left them both to die in the dark, and discovered that some caves don't just contain the dead, they digest them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, back when I still slept through the night, and didn't check my pockets 17 times a day to make sure it wasn't there. Back when I could look at myself in the mirror without wanting to put my fist through the glass. Back when I still had friends. Mark had been obsessed with the Captain Jack story since we were kids. We met in 4th grade when his family moved to Jack's Falls from Portland, and within a week, he was checking out every book on pirates the school library had. His grandfather had filled his head with tales about hidden treasure and secret caves, the kind of thing that sounds awesome when you're 10 and pathetic when you're 27. But Mark never let it go. By high school, he was the kid who spent his summers hiking the coastline with a metal detector and a waterproof notebook, filling pages with sketches of cliff faces and tide tables. By college, he'd switched his major to colonial history 3 times before his advisor convinced him to just finish the anthropology degree he'd mostly completed. He wrote his senior thesis on privateering economics in the late 1600s. His girlfriend Sarah thought it was charming. I thought it was a waste of a perfectly good education. But Mark had that kind of focused obsession that's impossible to argue with. He'd spent years, literal years, researching old naval records, studying tide patterns, learning geology and cave systems, hiking every inch of coastline looking for cave entrances that matched historical descriptions. He had a whole wall in his apartment covered with maps, some of them modern topographical surveys, others photocopies of documents he'd tracked down in university archives across 3 states. Sarah enabled him, mostly because she found his enthusiasm charming and because she liked hiking. She was tall, athletic, the kind of woman who ran marathons for fun, and had opinions about specific brands of hydration packs. She worked as a physical therapist and approached Mark's treasure hunting with the same practical enthusiasm she brought to helping people recover from knee surgery. She'd go on his expeditions, help him document his findings, and gently suggest when maybe it was time to call it a day and get some dinner. Me? I just went along because Mark was my best friend and I didn't have much else going on. My job was remote data entry for an insurance company. My girlfriend had left me 8 months prior for a guy who owned a CrossFit gym. I lived alone in a studio apartment that smelled like old takeout no matter how many candles I burned. When Mark called and asked if I wanted to spend a Saturday scrambling around on rocks looking for pirate gold, it beat sitting at home refreshing social media and feeling sorry for myself. So when my phone rang that October morning, I was already half prepared to say yes, before I even answered. I found it, John. Mark's voice had a tremor in it I'd never heard before. Not excitement exactly. Something deeper. I actually fucking found it. He'd been exploring a section of cliff face about 2 miles north of town, somewhere we'd passed dozens of times without noticing anything unusual. The area was a mess of collapsed rock and wind-twisted pines, the kind of place that looked like it was actively trying to kill you. But the recent storm, a nasty nor'easter that had knocked out power for 2 days and sent 3 boats to the bottom, had caused a minor rock slide. Mark had spotted something that made him scramble down to investigate despite the loose rocks and the 40-foot drop to churning surf below. A small opening, partially concealed by centuries of erosion and debris, but unmistakably man-made around the edges. Not a natural crack, but something that had been worked with tools. The stone showing the kind of deliberate shaping that only comes from human hands. He'd taken photos, measurements, GPS coordinates. He'd stuck his head inside far enough to feel moving air, which meant the cave went somewhere. It wasn't just a shallow depression. He'd found tool marks on the walls that matched the kind of work that would have been done with 17th century equipment. And best of all, he'd found something carved into the rock just inside the entrance. 3 letters. J.M. Jack Morgan. "It's this weekend, or never," he said, and I could hear him pacing as he talked, practically vibrating with energy. Tide patterns won't be this favorable again until next year, and you know the county's been talking about putting up fencing along that whole stretch. Environmental protection, liability concerns, all that bureaucratic bullshit. This is it, John. This is actually it. This is the cave. I know it is. I should have said no. I had a dozen good reasons. My knees weren't what they used to be after I'd torn my ACL playing softball 3 years back. I had work on Monday, a deadline I was already behind on. Cave diving, or spelunking, or whatever the hell you wanted to call crawling around in tight, dark spaces, had never been my idea of fun. I got anxious in elevators, for Christ's sake. The thought of being underground, surrounded by tons of rock, made my chest tight just thinking about it. But Mark had that tone in his voice, the one that meant he was going with or without me, and I'd known him since we were 10 years old. I couldn't let my best friend do something that stupid alone. "Fine," I said, "but if I get stuck in a hole and die, I'm haunting your ass." "You won't get stuck. I've already scouted it. Totally doable. That's what you said about that ravine hike 2 summers ago, and I nearly broke my ankle. You didn't break it, though. You were fine. I was limping for a week." "Okay, but this time I mean it. This is safe. Relatively safe. Safer than it sounds." Which should have been my second warning sign, after the fact that he'd already scouted it alone without telling anyone, but I ignored that too, because that's what I did back then. I ignored warning signs. I went along with things. I said yes, when I should have said no. I wish I could go back and tell myself to hang up, to block Mark's number, to move to a different town and never look back. But I can't. All I can do is tell you what happened, and hope to God you're smarter than I was. Sarah picked me up Saturday morning in Mark's truck, the bed already loaded with gear. Helmets with mounted LED lights, ropes, and carabiners that looked like they could hold a small car. A first aid kit that looked military grade with Israeli bandages and a tourniquet and enough gauze to wrap a mummy. Energy bars, electrolyte tablets. 3 gallons of water in various containers. A small sledgehammer with a fiberglass handle. A pry bar. Work gloves. A portable battery pack. 2 emergency whistles. A collapsible shovel. In case we need to widen anything, Sarah explained when she caught me staring at the sledgehammer. She was wearing hiking pants with about 17 pockets, and a performance fabric shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had that focused look she got when she was in work mode. "Mark's already down there doing a preliminary scout. He's been up since 4. "Of course he has," I muttered, climbing into the passenger seat. He couldn't sleep. I heard him up at 2:30, pacing around, checking his equipment for the 15th time. You know how he gets. I did know. Mark had that kind of obsessive energy that made him brilliant at research, and absolutely exhausting to be around when he got fixated on something. He'd spend 18 hours straight on a project, forget to eat, forget to sleep, and then crash for a day and a half. Sarah had learned to just roll with it, to make sure he stayed hydrated and didn't completely destroy his sleep schedule. The drive took 20 minutes on the main road. then another 10 on progressively worse side roads, and finally 5 minutes on what could only generously be called a path. Basically 2 tire ruts, through scrub grass and loose rock, the truck bouncing hard enough to make my teeth click together. We parked where the trees gave way completely to open ground, the ocean visible as a gray-blue line in the distance. The wind coming off the water was cold enough to sting my eyes. It had that salt, sharp smell that meant a storm was coming, though the forecast had been clear when I'd checked it that morning. The sky was overcast. Thick clouds the color of old bruises pressed low overhead. The temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees just in the time it took us to get out of the truck. Mark was waiting by the cliff edge, practically vibrating with excitement. He'd rigged a rope system to make the descent easier, using some of the scraggly pines as anchor points and running the line through carabiners he'd bolted into the rock. He walked us through the process twice, showing us how to use the friction device to control our descent, where to put our feet, which handholds were solid and which ones might crumble. "The entrance is about 30 feet down," he said, his words coming fast and breathless. "It's concealed from above, which is why nobody's found it before. You can't see it unless you're actually on the cliff face. But it's there. I measured it. The opening is about 3 feet high by 2 feet wide at the entrance, but it opens up pretty quickly inside. Maybe 15 feet in, you can stand upright." "How far did you go?" Sarah asked. "Not far. Maybe 50 feet. I wanted to wait for you guys, but I could feel air movement, Sarah. Real airflow, not just the tide. This thing goes somewhere. It's not just a dead end." The descent was exactly as nerve-wracking as I'd feared. The rock was slick with spray from the surf below, and loose in places, chunks of it crumbling away when I put my weight on them. I tried not to look down at the waves, smashing themselves against the rocks, 40 feet below us, each impact sending up plumes of white foam that looked like grasping fingers. About halfway down, my foot slipped and I swung out into empty space for a horrible second before catching myself on the rope. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "You good?" Mark called down. "Yeah," I managed, though my hands were shaking. "Just great. Living the dream." The cave entrance was exactly as unimpressive as I'd feared. A crack in the rock face, a wound in the stone that looked like it had been sealed for centuries, and had only recently split open again. The edges were rough, stained black by some kind of mineral deposit, or maybe just the accumulated dirt of 300 years. You could see tool marks if you looked closely, spots where someone had deliberately widened the opening or smoothed away protrusions. "You're sure about this?" I asked, staring at that dark opening. Something about it bothered me, the way it seemed too dark, like the shadows inside were somehow thicker than they should be. "Because it looks like we're about to crawl into the Earth's asshole." "The historical records are clear," Mark said, pulling out his phone to show me photos he'd saved. "British naval logs from HMS Dartmouth, dated November 1699. Captain Richard Thornton commanding. They chased Morgan's crew to this exact stretch of coast. Right here, John. The latitude matches within 100 feet. The pirates made it to shore but never came back out. Thornton waited for 3 days with his ship's position to intercept any escape by sea. His logs describe the exact configuration of these cliffs. This is it." "Maybe they drowned," I said. "Maybe they tried to swim around the headland and the current got them." "Then where are the bodies?" Thornton had his men search the shoreline for a week. Nothing. 18 men, John. 18 men and a cargo hold worth of Spanish silver just vanished. The Dartmouth had taken that silver from a Spanish merchant ship near Barbados 2 weeks earlier. Morgan and his crew stole it while the Dartmouth was in port. 3,000 pounds of silver ingots, plus coins and jewelry. That's like $8 million in today's money. And you think it's just sitting in a cave waiting for us to find it? I think they went in here and something happened to them. And I think whatever happened, the treasure is still there." Mark's eyes had that gleam I recognized, the one that meant he'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of rational conversation. "This cave goes somewhere. I can feel the air moving. It's not just a pocket. There's space in there. Real space. Maybe it connects to other caves. Maybe there's a whole system. But something's in there, and we're going to find out what." Sarah was already putting on her helmet, checking her light with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. We stick together. We stay in radio contact. And if anything feels wrong, we turn back immediately. Those are the rules. Agreed. I wanted to say no. I wanted to suggest we call someone official, get proper permits, bring in people who actually knew what they were doing. Geologists. Professional spelunkers. Anyone but 3 amateur treasure hunters with more enthusiasm than sense. But I could see the desperation in Mark's face, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. This was his white whale, his one shot at proving all those years of research weren't wasted. His chance to be the guy who solved a 300-year-old mystery, instead of just the weird treasure hunter kid who never grew up. And Sarah was already checking her gear, trusting Mark's judgment, ready to follow him into the dark, because that's what you do when you love someone. So I put on my helmet, I checked my light, and I followed my friends into the mouth of something that had been waiting centuries for another meal. We went in single file, Mark first with the biggest light, then Sarah, then me bringing up the rear. The entrance was a tight squeeze. I'm not a big guy, 5'10", 170 soaking wet, but I still had to turn my shoulders and exhale to fit through. Rocks scraped against my back and chest, simultaneously, catching on my jacket and the straps of my pack. For about 10 feet it felt like being swallowed. The walls pressed in from all sides. The ceiling so low, I had to keep my head tilted at an awkward angle. I could hear Mark ahead of me, his breathing echoing slightly in the confined space. Could hear Sarah's boots scraping against stone. Could hear my own heart beating too fast, my breath coming shorter than it should. And then, suddenly it opened up. The first chamber was about the size of a large bedroom, maybe 15 feet across and 12 feet deep. The ceiling was high enough to stand in most places, maybe 8 feet at the peak, sloping down to 5 or 6 feet at the edges. Our lights cut through the darkness, revealing rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. The air was cool but not cold, maybe 60 degrees. There was a faint smell I couldn't quite place. Mineral, definitely. Salt from the ocean. Something else underneath, something organic that I couldn't identify. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just unfamiliar, like old paper and wet stone and something vaguely metallic. See? Mark's voice echoed slightly in the space. Totally doable. This is definitely man-made. Look at the walls. He was right. In places you could see tool marks, spots where someone had deliberately widened the passage or smoothed away irregularities. It wasn't obvious, unless you were looking for it. But once Mark pointed it out, I couldn't unsee it. The walls were too regular in places, the angles too deliberate. This wasn't just a natural cave that someone had found. This was something that had been worked, shaped, improved. How far back does it go? I asked. Only one way to find out, Mark said, and started moving deeper. The cave branched twice in the first 20 minutes. Each time, Mark would pause at the junction, consult a hand-drawn map he'd made based on his research, study the way the air moved, and then pick a direction with what seemed like total confidence. He'd overlaid British naval charts with modern geological surveys and local folklore, creating a composite that supposedly showed the most likely route the pirates would have taken inland. I didn't understand half of it. Sarah seemed convinced enough to keep following. I just kept my mouth shut and tried not to think about the tons of rock above us, the ocean somewhere beyond that, and the very real possibility that we were trusting our lives to Mark's obsessive research and a 300-year-old pirate's desperate gamble. The temperature stayed consistent as we moved deeper, that cool but not cold feeling that suggested we were well insulated from the outside weather, but the smell grew stronger. That metallic undertone became more pronounced, less like minerals, and more like blood. Old blood. The smell of copper pennies and rust. I caught myself breathing through my mouth to avoid it, which was stupid because then I could taste it instead. Metallic and slightly alkaline, like licking a battery. About 40 minutes in, we stopped in a larger chamber to drink water and check our bearings. Mark was practically glowing with excitement, his hands gesturing as he described what he thought the cave system might look like, how it probably connected to other chambers, maybe even ran all the way under the peninsula to emerge somewhere on the protected bayside. Sarah was quieter than usual. When I asked if she was okay, she just nodded and said the smell was getting to her too. Her face looked pale in the LED light, and I noticed she kept swallowing hard, like she was fighting nausea. "We give it another hour," she said. "Then we turn back regardless of what we found. Agreed?" "Agreed," Mark said, though I could tell he didn't mean it. He'd keep going until we hit a dead end, or ran out of light, or oxygen, or the cave collapsed on us. We moved on. The passages narrowed and widened in irregular patterns, sometimes forcing us to crouch or even crawl. Other times, opening into spaces where our lights couldn't quite reach the ceiling. The walls showed more evidence of tool work the deeper we went. Deliberate shaping, spots where someone had broken through softer rock to widen a passage or make it easier to navigate. In one chamber we found the remains of old torches, just charred bits of wood that crumbled to powder when Mark tried to pick one up. Evidence that people had been here before, which made sense given the pirate story. But it also made the place feel more oppressive somehow, like we were following in the footsteps of doomed men. And the smell kept getting stronger. Sarah was the first to notice the writing. "There," she said suddenly, stopping so fast that I almost walked into her. She pointed her light at the wall. Scratched into the stone, barely visible even in the direct light, were marks. Not random scratches, but deliberate cuts. Symbols that might have been letters worn smooth by 3 centuries of slow water seepage and mineral deposits. Mark ran his fingers over them, his breath coming faster. He pulled out his phone and took several photos from different angles, adjusting his light to try to bring out the detail. His hands were shaking slightly. "This is it," he whispered. "This is actually it. This is 17th century script, I'm certain of it. Look at the way the R's are formed, and the long S that looks like an F. This is period accurate. This is from them, from Morgan's crew." He was nearly trembling as he traced the letters with his fingertip, his academic background in colonial history finally paying off in the most literal way possible. I could see tears in his eyes. The writing was fragmentary, hard to read, but some words were clear enough. "Sealed in," and "no way," and something that might have been "hungry." That last word made something cold settle in my stomach. The passage narrowed again after that, forcing us to crouch and then crawl. My knees immediately regretted every decision that had led me here. The rock was wet in places, slick with some kind of moisture that wasn't quite water. It was slightly thicker, more viscous, and it left my gloves feeling sticky. I noticed something else too. The walls were warmer here. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than they had been near the entrance, like something was generating heat deeper in the cave. "Is it just me?" I said, "or is it getting warmer?" "I feel it too," Sarah said. Her voice was tight. "That's not normal, right? For caves to get warmer as you go deeper?" "Depends," Mark said, not slowing down. "Could be geothermal activity, hot springs, magma chambers, that kind of thing. This whole coastline has some volcanic features. Nothing recent, but the geology is there." "Should we be worried about that?" I asked. "Only if it gets a lot warmer. We're fine." We were not fine. After maybe 20 minutes of crawling, my hands scraped raw even through my gloves, my knees feeling like they'd been beaten with hammers. The passage finally opened into another chamber. This one was larger than the first, maybe 15 feet across and 10 feet high at the center. Our lights played across the walls, revealing more tool marks, and what looked like old scorch marks from torches. The floor was uneven, covered in what looked like mineral deposits, or maybe coral, formations that caught our lights and reflected them back in strange ways. Then Mark swept his light across the far wall and froze. Holy shit. The skeleton was slumped against the wall, still wearing the rotted remains of what might have been a coat. The fabric had long since degraded to brown tatters that looked more like fungus than cloth, but you could still make out what might have been brass buttons scattered on the ground nearby. The skull had tipped forward onto the chest, jaw hanging open in a silent scream. One arm was extended as if reaching for something. The bones of the hand splayed out like it had been clawing at the floor. Around the skeleton were scattered artifacts, scraps of leather that might have been a belt or boots, a rusted knife that had corroded almost completely away, the blade barely recognizable, what looked like the remains of a small wooden barrel, the staves collapsed inward, metal bands crusted with verdigris, and bones, other bones, scattered across the floor like someone had torn apart a body and discarded the pieces. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched, a sharp exhalation that echoed in the chamber. Mark just stood there, staring, his light steady on the corpse. Is this real?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's real." Mark moved closer, careful not to disturb anything, playing his light over the remains with the reverence of an archaeologist who'd just made the discovery of a lifetime. "Look at the clothing, the style of the coat, what's left of it. The buttons. Those are pewter, I think. Hand cast. This is late 17th century. I'd bet my life on it. This is one of them, one of Morgan's crew. But none of us were really looking at the skeleton anymore. We were staring at the wall behind it. Someone had carved words into the stone, not just a few marks, but entire paragraphs, maybe hundreds of words, the letters crude but deliberate, clearly done with something small and sharp, probably that corroded knife, over what must have been days or weeks of desperate work. The text started high up on the wall and descended in ragged columns, getting messier and harder to read as it went down, the letters becoming more irregular, more frantic, like whoever carved it had been running out of time, or sanity, or both. Mark moved closer, playing his light over the text, systematically, and began to read aloud. His voice shook slightly, though whether from excitement or fear I couldn't tell. November 15th, 1699. We are 12 now. The cave goes deeper than we thought. Captain says there's a way through to the other side of the peninsula, that we can emerge in the protected bay, where the Dartmouth cannot follow. But Davies and Mockton went looking 2 days past and haven't returned. We hear them sometimes, calling from below in the dark places. We search and search but find nothing. It's like their voices come from the walls themselves. The handwriting was rough, the spelling inconsistent in the way of men who'd learned their letters late in life or not at all, but the message was clear, and getting worse. Mark moved his light down, finding more text, carved in increasingly shaking lines. November 18th. The food is running low. Captain has ordered strict rationing. 1 biscuit per man per day. Water only when the thirst becomes unbearable. We dare not go back the way we came. The Navy dogs are surely waiting at the entrance, and we'll hang for certain if we're caught. James swears he heard Davies calling from somewhere below, pleading for help, but we search and find nothing. The air tastes wrong down here, like copper and rot. Thomas says it's just the damp, says all caves smell like this, but I know better. I've been in caves before. This is different. Something's not right. The walls are warm to the touch, and sometimes I swear I feel them move. Jesus, Sarah breathed. She moved closer to me, and I realized she was shaking. Her hand found mine and gripped it tight enough to hurt. More text. The letters growing more cramped and erratic as they descended the wall. The carver clearly running out of space or time or the will to continue. November 22nd. 5 more are gone. Johnson, Williams, Black Peter, young Thomas, and Edward. They went deeper seeking another way out. Seeking fresh air. Seeking anything but this tomb. They took one of the lanterns, and we could see their light moving down in the tunnels below us, getting smaller and smaller, until it winked out like a candle. We called to them, but heard only echoes. Then we heard screaming. Terrible screaming that went on, until it didn't. The captain is changing. He speaks to shadows, argues with voices only he can hear. William says the treasure is cursed, and we should leave it. Abandon it in the deepest hole we can find, and flee this place while we still can. But the captain will not hear of it. He guards the silver like a dragon guards gold in the old stories my mother used to tell. He's hidden it somewhere in the deeper tunnels and goes to visit it. Comes back with his hands wet and his eyes strange. The walls feel warm to the touch now, which makes no sense this deep underground. We are far below the sun's reach, far from anything that might produce heat. Yet the stone is warm like fever skin. The water that drips from above is thick and sticky, not clean like it should be. It leaves stains on our clothes that won't wash out, brown and red like old blood. Jacob drank some yesterday despite warnings and has been sick ever since. He cannot stop shitting himself. The smell is awful. We had to move him to a different chamber because we couldn't stand it. I reached out and touched the wall where the writer had mentioned warmth. He was right. The stone was warm. Not hot, but distinctly warmer than it should be this far underground. At least 10 degrees warmer than the air temperature. Maybe more. Like touching skin. I pulled my hand back quickly and found my fingertips slightly damp, with that same sticky residue we'd been seeing on the walls. I wiped my hand on my pants, disgusted, but the feeling wouldn't go away. My fingers felt slick, oily, like I'd touched something rotten. "Keep reading," I said, though part of me wanted him to stop. Wanted us to turn around right now and get the fuck out of this place. But I couldn't look away from those words carved in stone. Couldn't stop listening as Mark continued, his light moving to text that was barely legible now. The letters scratched so hard and fast they'd gouged deep furrows in the rock. November 27th. 3 of us remain. Jacob died yesterday, his body racked with fever and convulsions, his skin covered in sores that wept clear fluid. We buried him in one of the side tunnels, covered him with rocks as best we could. This morning when we went to check on him, he was gone. Not his body. The rocks were undisturbed. But when we moved them aside, there was nothing there. As if the cave had swallowed him whole, absorbed him into itself. The captain has taken the treasure and Thomas deeper into the cave. He says the voices told him where to go, showed him the way. He is mad. We are all mad. The cave breathes. I know this sounds like the ravings of a fevered mind, but I swear it on my mother's grave. The cave breathes. At night, when all is quiet, I can hear it. A great bellowing sound like a whale surfacing, like the earth itself drawing breath. The walls pulse in time with it. The floor trembles. Yesterday, I saw John Carver embedded in the rock up to his waist, still alive but unable to move. His eyes followed me as I passed, and I could see his lips forming words, begging me for help. I tried to dig him out, but the rock was soft like clay, and my hands sank into it. It only made him sink deeper. When I returned hours later, following the same passage, he was gone. Only a stain remained on the wall where he'd been, dark and wet like someone had spilled wine. The thing in these caves, it hungers. It feeds slowly. It savors. "Okay," I said, my voice coming out higher than I'd intended. "Okay, we need to go back. Right now." "Are you kidding?" Mark's eyes were wild in the beam of his headlamp, reflecting the light like an animal's. "This is it, John. This is the actual historical record of what happened to them. And the treasure, he says the captain took it deeper. It's still down here somewhere. We're so close. Mark, this is clearly a man losing his mind, Sarah said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She wanted to believe it was just ravings, wanted to explain it away, but her hand was still gripping mine, and she was staring at that wall of text like it might come to life and attack us. Walls that breathe, people embedded in rock and then vanishing. He was starving and dehydrated and probably sick, hallucinating. Then explain this, Mark said, pointing to where the text ended. There, carved with what must have been the last of the writer's strength, were final words. It took them all. Captain, Thomas, everyone. I can hear them in the walls now, screaming, but when I press my ear to the stone, they go silent. It knows I'm listening. It's playing with me. The silver is lost. Let it stay lost. Let this place be forgotten. Let no one follow where we have gone. It will not let us leave. Even if I reach the entrance, even if I see the sun again, I know it will follow. I can feel it inside me now, in my blood, my bones. It beats. Below that, a date. December 3rd, 1699. And below that, scratched so deep the stone had cracked around it, the final words. It beats it, beats it, beats it, beats. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of our breathing and a faint dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond our lights. And then I heard it. Distant. Deep. So low I felt it more than heard it. Thump. Thump. Like a heartbeat. Like drums. Like something massive drawing breath. Thump. Thump. Did you... Sarah started, then stopped. Did you hear that? Probably just water, Mark said, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. These caves echo weird. Sound travels through stone. It's probably the ocean, the tide going in and out. That's all. Thump thump. That doesn't sound like the ocean, I said. There's another passage, Mark said, pointing to a gap in the far wall, behind, and to the left of the skeleton. If the captain went deeper with the treasure, that's where he'd have gone. That's the only way forward from here. Mark, no, I said. This is insane. This is fucking insane. We need to document this. Come back with professionals, with equipment, with people who actually know what they're doing. By the time we do that, the county will have sealed the cave. You know they will. This is our one chance. He was already moving toward the gap, stepping carefully around the skeleton, his light playing across the opening. Just a quick look. 15 minutes. If we don't find anything, we turn back. You said that 45 minutes ago about giving it another hour, Sarah said. I know. But we're so close. Please, just 15 more minutes. Sarah looked at me. I looked at her. And without words, we both agreed. We couldn't let him go alone. Because that's what you do for the people you love. Even when they're making catastrophically stupid decisions. You follow them into the dark. The passage was tighter than anything we'd encountered so far. A squeeze that required removing our packs and pushing them ahead of us while we crawled on our bellies like worms. The rock pressed in from all sides, catching on our clothes, scraping against our helmets. In places it was so tight I had to exhale completely to make myself small enough to fit through. For one horrible moment about halfway through, I was certain I'd gotten stuck. My chest felt too large for the gap, my hips, wedged between unyielding stone, my arms trapped ahead of me so I couldn't push. I couldn't move forward and I couldn't back up, and I was just stuck there, my breathing coming faster and faster, panic rising in my throat like vomit. John? Sarah's voice, muffled by rock and distance. You okay? I'm stuck, I managed, trying to keep the hysteria out of my voice. I can't move. Don't panic. Just breathe. Exhale all the way and try to wiggle forward. I did what she said. Forced myself to exhale completely, felt my chest collapse, and pushed with my toes. Something gave way, and I slid forward 6 inches, then popped through into a larger space where Mark was waiting. You good? He asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. This chamber was different from the others in a way that made every instinct I had scream at me to run. The walls had a strange texture, less like rock and more like something else. My first thought was coral, but that wasn't quite right. It was too uniform, too smooth in places. The surface had a subtle grain to it, like leather or skin. The color was wrong too, not the gray or brown of limestone, but something redder, darker, mottled with patches that looked disturbingly like bruises. And the smell was stronger here, that copper penny scent mixed with something organic and faintly rotten, like meat that's just starting to turn, like the inside of a mouth. Mark ran his hand along the wall and frowned. This doesn't feel like limestone. What does it feel like? Sarah asked. She was standing very close to me, and I could feel her trembling. I don't know. It's softer and warm. Really warm. I forced myself to touch the wall, though everything in me was screaming not to. He was right. The surface wasn't stone. It was too yielding, too organic. When I pressed my palm against it, it gave slightly, like pressing on firm rubber or cartilage. And it was warm. Not just warm, but hot. At least 90 degrees. Maybe more. Body temperature. When I pulled my hand away, my palm came back damp with something that definitely wasn't water. It was thicker, slightly viscous, and when I rubbed my fingers together it felt alkaline, like the slick you get from dissolving soap, or like the fluid inside a blister. We should turn back, I said. Right now. This is wrong. This whole thing is wrong. Look. Mark's light had found something embedded in the wall. A coin. A gold coin. Its surface tarnished with verdigris, but unmistakable even through the corrosion. Spanish doubloon. Has to be. Sarah, take a photo. She did, her camera flash, momentarily blinding us all, leaving purple afterimages dancing in my vision. Mark pulled out a small pry bar from his pack and began working at the coin, wiggling it back and forth. Mark, don't... I started. Too late. The coin came free with a sound I will never forget. A wet, sucking pop, like pulling your boot out of thick mud, or like something being ripped out of flesh. Mark held it up triumphantly, turning it in the light. See? I told you. This is... Then Sarah made a sound, a strangled gasp, and we both looked to where she was pointing. The wall where the coin had been was bleeding, not weeping moisture, not stained with rust or mineral deposits. Bleeding. Thick, dark blood that welled up from the hole Mark had made and began to run down the wall in slow rivulets. It was too dark to be fresh blood. It had that oxidized, almost black color of blood that's been sitting too long, but it flowed like blood, with that distinctive viscosity, and as I watched, more of it came seeping out of the wound. What the fuck? Mark whispered, and his hand opened reflexively. The coin fell to the floor with a wet thud, landing in a growing puddle of whatever that fluid was. The wall around the wound began to pulse, slowly at first, barely visible, then faster, more pronounced, a rhythmic motion that spread outward in ripples from where Mark had removed the coin. The whole section of wall was moving, flexing, like a muscle contracting. And somewhere in the distance, deep in the cave, we heard it clearly now. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. Not the ocean, not water moving through tunnels. This was biological. This was a heartbeat, massive and slow, echoing through the passages like thunder. Okay, Sarah said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Okay, we're leaving. Right now. Mark, I don't care about the treasure. We need to go. But Mark was already moving forward, his light catching something in the passage ahead. His face had gone pale, but there was still that gleam of obsession in his eyes. Wait, do you see that? More coins. Dozens of them, embedded in the walls and floor like metal studs in leather. And beyond them, an opening. A larger chamber. Mark, no, I said, grabbing his arm. We're leaving. Right fucking now. He shook me off. Just a quick look. I need to see. And against every instinct I had, against every survival mechanism that evolution had given me, I followed him. Because that's what I did. I followed. I went along. Even when I knew it was wrong. Even when I knew it would destroy me.